What's up, UX fam? How's your mom and them? Welcome to another episode of Beyond UX Design. I'm Jeremy. If you're new here, welcome to the show. I am super stoked to have you. Have you picked up your copy of my new book, Beyond UX Design, Master Your Craft Beyond Pixels and Prototypes yet? Unlock the secrets of UX success and learn all the things that they didn't teach you in school. Use the promo code LISTENER for 10% off your copy. Just head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/book to pick up your copy today. And this week's episode is brought to you by Mento Design Academy, where it's not just about learning UX design, it's about discovering your unique path in it. And their approach is different. It's personal. It's tailored to you. They don't just teach, they inspire students to use their passions as a driving force in their learning. And that's something that I've experienced firsthand as a mentor. I've been fortunate enough to guide students who are exploring concepts that they're truly passionate about. It's not just about following a curriculum, it's about shaping that curriculum around what excites each student. And this approach emphasizes not just knowledge, but a deep love for the discipline. And seeing my mentees grow, apply their passions and craft portfolios that are genuinely them, it's been one of the most rewarding experiences of my career. So if you're looking for a UX course that's as unique as you are, check out Mento Design Academy. Head on over to beyonduxdesign.com/mento. And just for my listeners, use the promo code BeyondUX200 to get $200 off the course. So join Mento and let your passions lead your learning journey. And if you haven't done it already, please consider subscribing to the show wherever you listen to podcasts. If you are a regular here and you feel like you're getting something out of the show, I would really appreciate you leaving a 5-star review. That'll help me out so much more than you can imagine. And as always, thanks so much to Chris, Siraquan, Stacy, Radu, Megan, Andrew, John, Mark, Kevin, Jason, Michelle, and Marty for all their support. And if you want to join those fine folks and many others and help keep the show independent and ad-free, you'll get rough transcripts and exclusive access to the entire video library of episodes, including episodes before they're released. And you can get instant access to the video archives for as little as $5 a month. And for more information on how you can support the show and help more people find out about what we're doing here, make sure to check out beyonduxdesign.com/support. And of course, if you think the show is worth sharing, then I would love it if you told some friends. So personal brand, it gets a really bad rap, I think. And I've heard lots of people disparage personal brand, quote unquote, and give it a lot of shit. But when they trash it, they basically say the same thing that proponents of personal brand say. Just, be aware of what you put out there. Just be your authentic self. But really, personal brand can be a confusing thing, I think, especially because of all the people kind of trashing it online. But thinking about your personal brand can be incredibly beneficial, especially for people shifting careers into UX design. I think it's a great way to tell your story, your unique story, and show off your expertise from that previous field. So I've got Anais Wittrock-Roske on today. She's got an incredible backstory going from nursing into UX design, and I am really excited to have her on today. Anais is a dedicated nurse turned product leader. She excels in both saving lives, I love that, and creating exceptional products. And her leadership extends to cultivating high-performing teams with expertise in product strategy, UX, consumer behavior, human-centered design, and team development. Anais, welcome to Beyond UX Design. I am so excited to have you. How's it going?
It's going well. Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited.
Right on. Well, me too. Yeah, so you've got an incredible backstory. We talked a little bit about you being a nurse. Tell us about that, because I'd love to hear that transition from nursing into UX design. I don't think I know any other nurses turned designers. So I think you might be the first one I've talked to. But ultimately, we're going to talk today about how you were able to take that idea of personal brand and leverage that and turn it into a successful UX career. So before we get started on all that, tell us about you and how'd you make that transition from nursing into UX?
Yeah. So again, I'm Anais. I am a Ukrainian Arabic immigrant. And first and foremost, I chose nursing because that's something that you do. I loved medicine. I loved the cognitive challenge it provided me, but I never felt ownership over it. It was extremely difficult, and I never noticed how hard it was until I transitioned to UX. I mean, UX is still difficult, but I think hard work is easy when you love what you do.
It's true.
I feel it. And so I transitioned around 2021 fully, but before that, I've done some freelance work and never fully dived into UX because I was just like really scared. And also it's like, what will my folks say? Being a nurse, it's like people respect you for it. You know, it's you have a bunch of job security with that, but I just felt the need after 2020, after a little bit of burnout, that I really fully want to dedicate myself to UX. Again, before that, I actually had a jewelry company and
Oh,
I
okay.
was designing physical products. And
Yeah.
so, as a nurse, like you're always washing your hands, and some of my rings began to tarnish. And I was like, hey, that'd be really cool if I could wear my earrings, my rings. And so, I started, sketching things out, talking to a chemist and seeing how we can formulate metals so they don't tarnish. And yeah, that kind of began my journey in product design. I had someone who was a review of someone who said, "Hey, I put your jewelry in my dishwasher and it didn't survive." And that began the iterative design of like, hey, if I make jewelry that is dishwasher proof, it can survive any element that
Yeah.
humans go through.
That's fascinating. So, dishwasher. So I have so many questions here. There's a million things I want to ask you about before we even get into the personal brand. I'm gonna go backwards.
Yeah.
The dishwasher. Is that something that you were actively selling? Like it could go in the dish. Why would someone put their jewelry in the dishwasher? I don't even know why someone would do that.
Exactly. That was my first thought. And being a new business owner, it was just like I didn't have that many reviews. And so when that review came through of like, your jewelry's horrible, I put it in my dishwasher and it tarnished.
Yeah.
And then I was like, part of me was unhappy, but then another
Mm-hmm.
part of me was like, that's genius because
Yeah.
no one's going through that much heat and acid on their daily life. And so that review actually, changed the course of the physical product. And that's what really got my interest in product design. The business side was fun, right? But
Mm-hmm.
also the most fun part is sending a product out there, having users test it, and then coming back with a better version of it. And I think that ties in really nicely with today's topic of personal brand and creating yourself as the product as well.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. So question. I know we're going like totally off topic, but that's the beauty of the show. I really don't care. When you got that review, you had that idea. Is that something you actually were able to do? Did you figure out how to make jewelry that was dishwasher safe and then sell that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh wow. Okay.
We went back with the chemist I was working with and started giving different percentages of metals and stuff that you can coat the jewelry in, so that the gold never tarnishes but still remains the percentage of gold that it usually has. Um, Making it affordable for folks, but also making, I don't know, great products, especially for nurses. It wasn't like it was thought of, but I just struggled with something and I wanted to do something about it. And that's why I work in the healthcare space. I think I was
Yeah.
really at times frustrated being a nurse, and now it feels like I can do something about it behind the scenes with UX.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I definitely see the parallels there. I still have a couple questions for you. The personal
Yeah.
brands. Do you still have that company? Do you still do the jewelry?
I just sold it a year
Oh,
ago.
okay.
It got to the point
Sold it.
where it was a lot of fun, but I think when I was a nurse, that company was a way for me to practice UX design.
Mm-hmm.
And now that I'm working, I feel a bit more fulfilled.
Oh,
Um,
okay. Yeah,
and it's
I love
taught
that.
me a lot of stuff about business and things that I'm practicing on the daily basis. So I'm really grateful for that experience. But yeah, entrepreneurship is hard. One of
Yes.
their the best lesson is just like act, action,
Mm,
and also knowing when to let go. So it's the time of the company where you either have to go all in or start selling off the pieces when the business is still successful. And so for me, I felt in my heart that it was time to let go. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. That's awesome. Well, that's super fast. I mean, that alone is an interesting story. We talk about personal brand and all this stuff. One of the things, and the thing that I really love about the idea of a personal brand, when you can apply that to, your backstory, your origin story. If you're a career shifter, you've got a lot of really unique things and stories to tell. You mentioned something very briefly before. You were immigrant. You mentioned Ukrainian and Arab, which is a unique combination. I don't think I ever really see Ukrainian or European and Arab, mixing very often. I mean, humans tend to stick close to their tribe in a way.
That's right.
So that alone is like an interesting thing, and I imagine that adds to your personal brand, or you've probably figured out a way to take that idea of being an immigrant. I assume that means you weren't born in the United States, or where do you live now? I didn't even ask. Are you in the United
Yeah.
States or in Canada? Or?
I'm in the US. I'm in Minneapolis.
You're in Minneapolis. Okay, I know we're like similar time zones. That's why I was curious. That alone is an interesting story. A lot of challenges that I'm sure you had to overcome. I imagine you didn't grow up speaking English. Probably had to learn English. I don't know. I'm putting words in your mouth. I'm curious, but that I guess this is a really great way to kind of start talking about personal brand here. When you think about personal brand, I think about those things: the backstory, the origin story, the unique challenges that you've overcome. Tell me a little bit about that upbringing, the Ukrainian Arab upbringing, and coming to the United States and learning English and all that stuff.
Yeah,
I don't even really have a question. I just want to learn more about that.
absolutely. So my folks are divorced, but I grew up here. I moved here when I was 10, and I have a Ukrainian mom, a stepdad from Minnesota. And so the dichotomy of my dad being very Minnesota nice, and then Ukrainians were a bit more direct, and I think to
Okay.
Midwesterners that could come off as aggressive. And honestly, that's something that I think a lot of immigrants feel, especially when growing up, is that you don't really fit in anywhere. So when I've been back to Ukraine, it's like I can identify with that culture, but I don't feel like it's home. But same with,
Interesting. Yeah.
being in Minnesota, it's like I identify US as my home, but I still have characteristics of someone who is direct and upfront. And sometimes it's been great, so, in the medical profession, being ER, trauma, and intensive care nurse, that worked out really well. But shifting to corporate, being direct, isn't always the best.
Well, that's a really
So
great point.
constantly learning how to talk to different people and personalities. And so that's been quite a challenge, and I'm sure other people can relate to being kind of a nomad. And
Hmm.
the more folks that I meet who are immigrants themselves, I think feel very similarly about that experience.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting because one of the things that I like to say, especially about career shifters often, is they tend to excel in UX design rather quickly compared to someone just out of school. And I usually attribute that to their past experience, a lot of times working in an office, a different field, but still an office, working with people, working maybe in a corporate environment, in office, the office politics and the courtesies and all those things. And you bring up a really great point, though, that coming from something like nursing, where, it's like, shut up, I don't care if you're hurting. Like, if I don't do this, you're going to die, especially in like trauma and ER. People are
That's
probably
right.
complaining all the time. And you're just like, I don't care. I got someone else dying over there. Your thing's not as important. You can't say that in a corporate environment, right? So
Yeah.
that I never thought about that. But that coming from that environment, I imagine has got to be quite jarring when you're now suddenly in a someone thinks the world is dying because like their thing is late and you're like, are you kidding me? Like, what I experienced a few years back, so I don't know. That's got to be really interesting. I don't know if you have
Yeah.
anything
I
to add to
love
that,
what
but
you just said there. I think gaining empathy for folks you work with, even for someone like, as UX designers, we're natural empaths, but sometimes it's hard, right? Like, because you've seen people having like someone's worst day is your everyday as a nurse, and then transitioning to a place where folks are sometimes super anxious, like PDF didn't
hmm.
get sent,
Right.
or, someone said something in an email that, didn't feel quite right with them. And what I've noticed is that when people feel anxious or angry, even though they're completely different environments and the stakes are higher in medicine, that level of anxiety is the same. So a doctor or nurse taking care of someone who's like potentially dying, that heightened anxiety can be the same in someone who's in the corporate environment and may have sent the wrong PDF.
Right.
But yeah, it's
Right.
definitely a challenge. I'm still learning. It's helped me in a lot of ways of like taking more action. It's like
Mm,
nothing that I do in a corporate environment is going to kill someone.
right.
Versus in medicine, everything has to be perfect, because the stakes are so much higher. You're responsible for another human's life. And
Right.
so now it's given me the freedom to just, kind of say what I need to, take the actions that I need to, because it's a safer space to make mistakes.
Yeah, I love that. And I also feel like, thinking more about this idea of personal brand, that idea of like I'm direct, I'm no nonsense. I'm not going to give you a bunch of fluff. There's no bullshit when it comes to me. That to me is the kind of stuff that I start to think about when I think about personal brand. And so I want to get into the personal brand thing now. I want to know, like, from your perspective, what is personal brand? Because you hear a lot of people trashing personal brand and, oh, it's a logo and blah blah blah. The brand is for a company and a product, not a person. But I want to hear from you. When you think about personal brand, what does that mean to you?
Yeah. Well, first I want to like say that I used to be one of those people that would trash it. I thought it was embarrassing, right? I was just like, no, my hard work is it. And I came from an environment where your hard work was it, your results
Mm-hmm.
were it. But to me, what a personal brand means is a digital curation of a resume. Today, most of the things are online. So instead of like a resume that you'd give to your employer, right? It's a curation of your job opportunities, and you've really worked hard to make every word in there like look and sound great so that you get the job. Now we have like LinkedIn, TikTok, and especially as a creative, folks are not only looking on job boards, they're looking everywhere for talent. And so for me, personal brand is think of yourself as the product, put stuff out there, test it, see what's working, and then come back and recurate yourself. An example of Instagram, someone said like, "Oh my gosh, like I wish I had your life." And I said to them, "I wish I had this life too." Um, because it's fake. It's a curation of what you want people to see. Personal brand, I think, is very important because if you don't tell people who you are, they're gonna make assumptions and then tell you who you are.
Right.
But
Yeah.
I'd love to hear like your thoughts, especially, being a identified male, how I think it differs, right, for genders.
Interesting. Yeah.
But I wonder how you feel about it.
I think it does differ, and I think it goes back to something like, an implicit stereotype where men do a certain thing, act a certain way, women do a certain thing and act a certain way. And I think what you said though is spot on before, right? Like when it comes to nursing, right, your work spoke for itself. People knew, like when Anais was around, things got done. When she wasn't around, things went through the cracks. When it comes to what we do, it's more ambiguous, and your work does not speak for itself. And so, just like you said, if I don't go online, people are going to look at it and make assumptions about me, a white guy, right, doing a certain thing. I have a gray beard, so like they might make assumptions about my experience or something, or not, or they might, like, ageism is also a problem too, which I think is something that I think a lot of people don't necessarily consider. I've started to experience it now that I'm 42. So there's certain advantages, I think, being a white male, but there's certainly certain disadvantages being a 40-year-old white male versus a 25-year-old white male or a 25-year-old woman or whatever, regardless of the color of their skin. And I think ageism is a problem. And so I think you're absolutely right. Like if I weren't to go and have this podcast, post online all the time, do the stuff that I do, I think people would make certain assumptions about me, good or bad. And I agree with you. Like, that's the thing. Your work doesn't speak for itself inside or outside the office. And so having a simple portfolio, throwing it out there, that's fine. But, I think just like you said, TikTok, Instagram, LinkedIn, whatever, newsletters, blog posts, whatever it is, it's supplemental to your resume. And it allows you to craft the narrative around you and your work that having just a case study would never do on its own. And I think I agree with you 100% on everything you said. So, I mean, that's my perspective. Obviously, I think personal brand's important. Otherwise, I wouldn't talk about it. But, that's the thing. I think it's really important. Your work doesn't speak for yourself. And if you aren't telling people who you are, they're going to make assumptions.
That's right. Yeah, and I love what you said. It's like the value of your work, right? Like you could have the same work, but if it's packaged differently, people respond to it differently. So I like to give people the example of Tiffany's, right?
Okay. Yeah.
Especially I think women can respond to this, or my kings. So when you think of Tiffany's, it's like, the gorgeous Tiffany blue color. So you could present a diamond ring in a Tiffany box and people respond to it differently, right? That diamond now has so much more value.
Yeah.
Whereas like if you just put it in, like a black box or something like that, no label, people respond to that a bit differently. And it could literally be the same ring, but because it's packaged differently, the value of that ring changes. And I
Yeah.
think the same happens with your work, right?
Yeah.
So it's like when I was interviewing, I remember one interview, it didn't go so well. Because again, I came from a world where you don't really brag about yourself, you don't put stuff online, look at me. And so
Yeah.
that felt unnatural and awkward,
Right.
and cringy. And
Cringy.
then
That's a really great way to think about like personal brand, because I think that's. So I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just want to
yeah,
highlight like cringy. I think that's what a lot of people think of it. They cringe because humans. Oh, some people like to brag about this, but for the most part, a lot of people they don't.
it's
And
gross. Yeah.
it does feel braggadocious in a way when you do think about personal brand. Anyway, I want to keep going. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just want to highlight like that word cringy. I feel like it's. I had a reaction when you said it. That's why I stopped you. But yeah, anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you. But cringy. I think that's such a. We're going to talk more about that in a second. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, no, so it felt really cringy to me, and I just had to I had to get over it because I was like, my work is outstanding, but I'm not getting results from these hiring managers. And then it switched. In one interview, I went into it being like, I don't care, and I'm going to be super confident about this work. And instead of saying like, this isn't my best work, I packaged it of like, this is innovation, this is my best work. And it worked. It
Yeah.
was like, again, the same work, but because it was packaged and presented differently. And I see a lot of really incredible designers that like I mentor myself, and they're fabulous, but I think, that either lack of confidence or not wanting to be cringy, I think sometimes hinders people from getting the attention or even employment that they deserve.
Yeah, I think that's important. Yeah, that's such an interesting thing too. When we think about UX design, I mean, we should be at least I think we should be thinking about the psychology of everything involved with building software, and that goes to how the users use it, but it also goes how we work with our team. It goes to how we influence our team, how the things that we say and the way that we act and the way that we present our work. Well, absolutely, 100%, just like you said, and it seems like you figured this out kind of by accident on your own, but the way that you present an idea absolutely influences how those people receiving that idea interpret it, either good or bad, right? And I think that's so important, and I think that is the essence of personal brand. When I think about it, it's taking control of that narrative and influencing the people that are receiving your work, that you might want to influence to get the job, or influence to make a decision, or influence to change a process, or whatever it is, using it in a way that influences it to your advantage. Obviously, you can take advantage of people that way, so don't be evil. But I love that you call that out, because when we talk about cringy a second ago, people think it's showing off. People think it's, being braggadocious or being really full of yourself. But I think if you think about it the way you are, in that it's a positive way to influence the conversation, it becomes, I think, hopefully at least, less cringy and more acceptable for us to do, and something that we should aspire to, because we don't want people taking the things we say out of context or in the wrong way. So anyway, I don't know. I just wanted to highlight that. I think that going back to what you said, cringy, I think that shifts the conversation and changes and reframes that around, a more positive thing versus a negative thing. And I think that's what most people kind of complain about and have a problem with when they diss on personal brand.
Yeah,
I don't know if you have
that's
any
right.
thoughts about that.
I love what you said, and it made me think of some of the best people, like really just good-hearted humans. They don't like this process, and they are actually the best designers because they're able to put themselves in the shoes of the user. But then that empathy stops them from personal brand. And I want to change people's perspectives of thinking like, you're a good human and you deserve to have your message out there. And if it's not you, it might be someone else that doesn't care about the user as much as you do. And
Right.
so knowing that you're a good human, how do you present, how would you present your work like you would a colleague's? And just start doing that for you. I think it starts with like an internal mindset, and then, disperses through how you present yourself and your work.
I love that. I actually never considered that before. That what you just said about presenting your work as if it's your colleagues, because often we are our own worst critic, and I think that was something you probably identified when you were originally, before you discovered this way to change the conversation. You weren't happy with your work. You didn't think it was the best thing, maybe, whatever it is. But we're often our own worst critic, and we're probably nitpicking these things. But if we were to talk to our colleague, we'd probably not find nearly as many faults in it as they would, unless there's obvious, obvious objective things that were wrong with it. But, even then, it's, don't be so subjective about your own work, right? It's like, what is objectively good? What is objectively bad? How can I fix this? Once it's good, then, objectively stating these things just like you would in a critique or something else to a colleague. And I love that idea. I actually never considered that before.
Yeah,
I don't know. I love that.
thank you.
So I wanted to ask you something. We talked a lot about what personal brand is. I'm curious if you ever thought about this. What is personal brand not? When you think about personal brand, what are things that wouldn't fall under personal brand that you think people should not be trying to do in this situation?
Yeah, this one is so tough because, I think having a platform and personal brand, you're still a public servant. And what I don't think it is, complaining, bringing some negative energy, things like saying things that you might regret later. One of the things I found is that as soon as you hit the send button or the post button, your information is not yours anymore. And so
Yeah.
the world of social media owns it, and they can nitpick at it. And I stay far away from having strong personal opinions. Although it's a part of myself, right? Like, I'm an activist in my daily life. I have obviously, political values I have, but I tend to stay away from sharing that on social. I think it becomes personal brand is not your identity, but rather a curation of experiences, skill sets, what you want to share with the world. And so if something's really close to you, right, like your family, your kids, loved ones, I don't think that's the most appropriate to start sharing, even like some mental health stuff. Well, I think it's great and makes people feel connected, being very particular where you're sharing that. So, my Instagram is very different from like LinkedIn or other design resources where I share my work. And I like to protect that. And so I don't think, I think however you feel comfortable, but just identifying what it is for you before starting that journey. That's a great
Uh,
question.
yeah, I love that. So that's interesting because that brings up a lot of really, really interesting questions for me, at least, because I feel like that's, your personal brand, right? Like there are probably people out there that would associate their personal brand with their political beliefs.
Right.
I'm going to come at you with this, and this is my, this is me. You know what you're getting because I'm putting this out there. But for you, right, like that's not, and that's actually, I'm just kind of thinking out loud here. The personal brand, we're talking about it in the sense of a professional,
Mm-hmm.
the professional aspect of it, right? Like getting a job, transfer, getting promoted, being known inside your company for a thing. Obviously, bringing politics and personal stuff into that environment is not going to be advantageous for you. And I love how you called it like having a goal, having a reason for shaping your personal brand. It's not just, I'm being my authentic self and this is all the stuff and all the crazy stuff that comes along with me. It's curated through the lens of a specific problem that you're trying to solve, which is getting a raise, getting promotion, getting a job, excelling your career. If
Yeah.
you sell content, maybe that's part of it too. You're trying to sell stuff, you're trying to sell books, whatever. I think that's something like a lot of people. What is it not? It is not just your authentic self. I think it's that curated thing that you want the world to see because you're trying to achieve a goal
Yeah.
through the brand, which is not unlike a company selling something. There's a brand there. There's I feel a certain way when I look at I don't know, Jif peanut butter versus reminds me of my kids and growing up and all that stuff versus the generic no-name peanut butter brand. And that's the brand. That's the brand for Jif, right? I think about the commercial when I was a kid. I think about like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, but that's intentional on Jif's part. It wasn't accidental, and
Exactly.
I think that's the thing to remember. I love that. What it is, what it isn't. I think it's the intentionality behind it
I
is
just
what.
got chills. As soon as you said intentional, I literally got chills because great companies, how they market things, the products they produce, like you have this like cognitive tie. Like as soon as you said Jif, I'm like, oh, I know
Hmm.
exactly the colors. It's like that teal blue, like peanut butter brown. I know like the curvature of, like the letters. And that's what you want for yourself, right? Like companies are intentional of what they're doing. Some of the best influencers, on social media, they might have pivoted, after 10 or so years, but I think they were always intentional about what they were doing on social media. Um, and so, yeah, I love that you said that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think about something like the Kardashians, right? Like none of that was accidental. I mean, it's all planned. It's all 100% intentional, and they probably had publicists that were in the background directing every single thing they said and did. Even down to the controversies
The
were probably
scandal.
planned. The scandals were planned. The fights were planned and all that stuff. I mean, maybe some of it was real in some way, but I have a hard time believing any of that was accidental. And I
Oh,
think that's a really great. But obviously, it's very different. Your personal brand as a UX designer is very different than your personal brand as a Kardashian. But if you think about it in terms of having a clear goal and outcome in mind, it's not really all that different. I don't think.
no,
Clearly, the things you're going to do and say are very different from the Kardashians if you're trying to get a job. But still, I think the concept is valid. And some people, I think, might cringe at that comparison. But I think that's very naive of them to do because I don't really see them being all that different. Aside from the actual activities and the things that you would say and do, I think the idea and the strategy behind it are very similar.
yeah. Oh, I
I don't know.
love having them as an example because, yes, like, right? Like, you look at them and you make fun of them, or you're like, oh, they're just such a cringy family. Like, what they're doing is stupid. But I'm like, how, like, that's that's it, right? Like someone who's made you think that, they're stupid is making millions of dollars off of it, right? There was like an episode where Kris, like the matriarch of the Kardashians, like peed herself. And then a month later, she took that opportunity and she was like the spokesperson for Depends.
Oh,
And you
geez.
look at
Okay.
that and you're
Yeah.
like, man, that is so cringy. I would not want to associate myself with Depends,
Right.
um, which are like diapers for older folks.
Yeah.
Um,
For anyone who doesn't know, I had never heard that before. By the way, that she did that.
yeah,
That's the other thing too. That goes like that stuff is recorded months prior, and it's released, it's produced, it's edited. You don't just release that. Like there's a strategy behind it. And as cringy as that is, the goal is to make a bunch of money, and she did it. And say what you want about that particular episode, which I had never heard of. It blows my mind that any adult would like want to put that on TV. But it goes back to your point though about the goal. The goal was to make money. The goal is not for anyone to like Kris Jenner and her family. I don't think she cares. I
no,
really don't. I don't think any of them care. Because if they did, they wouldn't be doing the things they do. I think the goal is to make money. And I don't know, maybe there's more altruistic things to it than that I'm not aware of. But
it's
I'd hate to
attention,
like dish on them, but yeah, attention, right?
right?
With the
Yeah,
goal of like ultimately making money. So
yeah. I think
all
it's
right, so that brings up.
go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was gonna say, especially in today's world where our attention is scattered in so many ways, right? The
Mm-hmm.
folks who get attention by means of something that's controversial or positive sometimes see the best results, and I think they do a great way of that.
Yeah. All right. So that bring me to the next thing I want to talk about is the value of a personal brand. Now we've talked about obviously getting a job, and we talked about having a goal. I'm curious from your perspective, throughout your career, not just getting a job, career shifting, whatever, the value of a personal brand. What are the things that maybe you've experienced specifically by embracing this idea that maybe you wouldn't necessarily have achieved otherwise?
First is action through the cringiness. So I'm less fearful of feeling embarrassed, of getting myself out there. Like this podcast, for example, I would have never done this 2 years ago.
Really?
I would have been like I'm shy, or what if I say something like that someone might not like and get judged for it? But I think getting over that like cringe mountain where
Cringe mountain. I love that.
Cringe mountain. Getting over that has really helped me with my self-confidence and all the really beautiful intrinsic things of like the small things that you think matter really don't. And the wider you set, your net, the more opportunities you can catch. And even if it's not like a job opportunity, I've met some really fabulous people who are like, hey, you said this thing on LinkedIn. I really like relate to that. And creating these human connections. But yeah, just, taking action. Because for me, like for years, I've procrastinated. And I think learning is procrastination to an extent, but it's taught me the value of taking action and, you know, the things that you feel cringy and sometimes might be embarrassing end up being the things that people applaud you for later on.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, so I'm curious, like from your perspective, what things can you attribute directly to embracing this idea of personal brand in your own life, in your own experience, your own professional life, personal life, whatever? What are some things that you can contribute directly to that? Have you ever thought about that?
Mm. Say more.
Like I guess you mentioned before in our pre-interview thing that personal brand helped you land the job. You think, well, you thought like, embracing that idea helped you land the job. I imagine promotions, employee, employment, what do you call them? Reviews, end of year reviews or whatever, mid-year reviews, whatever they are. I imagine that's kind of like something you've been embraced there. I'm curious, is there anything that you can attribute to say like, because I embrace this idea of reinforcing my personal brand, it has led me to this?
Yeah. Yeah, I've been mentioned in a couple articles, and there will be a news story coming out in our local paper
Oh,
being on podcasts, having opportunities literally come to you versus you searching out for them. And I think that's been an incredible and like powerful shift, because when you put yourself out there, or a curated, more professional version, in my instance, then folks like hiring managers are able to see like, wow, what she's putting out there really relates to what goals we're trying to accomplish. And then you're able to create those relationships and get those opportunities. And I think the most important is just like the energy I've received from other folks. So anything from job opportunities to friendships, feature and other, people's content space like yours. Yeah, I would attribute that to personal branding.
yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's kind of one of those things too, because when you think about, especially what you're putting out there, like the publications you want to be published in, the podcasts you want to go on, the channels that you want to embrace, the people you want to follow, the other people you want to interact with on a daily basis. All of that, I think, should be, kind of like put through the lens of like, what is your personal brand? What are you trying to say? And is this going to help you in the long run? Like going on a podcast where they're talking about like, I don't know, agile and engineering and trying to like talking about UX design is probably not really going to help you very much, right? But, maybe it would. I don't know. All depends on your goals there. But that audience is not going to be the audience that you're trying to. So like, what's the point other than maybe just doing it for fun? But getting in the wrong publication, like all that stuff, I feel like is something that you kind of think about through the lens of that personal brand and the outcome and the goals that you're trying to achieve. And it's kind of like it's self-reinforcing, and then that helps build it, and it's like a snowball almost, right? I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking about that out loud, but that's kind of just, I don't know. Imagine like a snowball going down a hill. You're from Minnesota, you know what snowballs are like. So, this is something that, I don't know. I kind of imagine it builds, and then you think about it more, and then it builds, and you think, and it like kind of grows and grows and grows over time.
Yeah.
I'm like using a bunch of hand motions for everybody out listening at home. They can't see this.
Yeah, I think
I don't
what
know.
you said is important. Like, even if you don't get the result that you want, you might not see it now, but you can connect the dots. Like, I never thought I'd be like on a UX podcast when I was in nursing school, right? My actual first career wasn't even in nursing. I studied to be a nutritional scientist, and then I pivoted into nursing for grad school. And so it was always science based, but now, like looking back, all that skill set has helped develop me as a person and curate that personal brand, just like you said in the earlier of the show, like you haven't seen another nurse become a UX designer. It's a weird shift in careers. And I'd also love to hear a bit more about your personal brand. I know you don't identify as having one, but I think yours is just so interesting because
Yeah, really. Oh, thanks.
even though you're interviewing other folks, it's like you're building your personal brand through that experience.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's something like I don't think I ever really thought about it, to be perfectly honest. I don't think it was ever anything that was planned necessarily. And I think maybe that is part of part of my brand is authenticity in a way. Like I'm not going to be like blunt and hurtful, but at the same time, like I'm not going to bullshit you necessarily, but in a fun way. Like I won't give you bullshit in a fun way, and we'll laugh about it, I guess. But fun, I don't know, hopefully smart, intelligent, thoughtful, but again, in like in a fun kind of way. And I think like one of the things that I try to do, especially at work, interviews for guests, but also interviews for jobs, I try to make them fun. I try to engage. I try to, my goal for every interview, we didn't talk about this before, but every interview is to laugh at least 3 times. And I think when I have a job interview, it's the same.
Well,
I'll crack a joke, or maybe not like the obvious joke, but I'll say something hopefully witty or funny or something and try to lighten up the room in a way. And, that to me, I use that, again, thinking about personal brand, like I use that to determine, is this the job that I want? Is this the job? If I'm going to be in a meeting with this person and it's a really intense meeting, because we missed a deadline or something, and they're just stone cold, straight face serious, is that your job I want? Is that a colleague I want to work with? And so I use my personal brand in a way to sort of like weed out the companies and the people that I wouldn't want to work for. Same with interviews. I mean, I do an interview prep before I have an interview for the show. And part of that is to say, like, would this person make a good guest?
Mhm.
If they're really boring and monotone, I don't want them on the show. I don't want, because I don't think anyone wants to listen to that,
Right.
So, that's part of it as well. And I use the same kind of techniques in that brand. And, hopefully that helps like engage with social media, which ultimately the goal there is to sell the podcast, get people to listen so I can sell sponsorships, so there's an ulterior motive there, but it's also like a give and take. Like I'm hopefully getting and you're hopefully getting and we're all getting when you
Yeah.
listen to it. So I don't know. I don't know if I went off on a tangent there, but I don't know. That's kind of my personal brand. Like intentionally on my LinkedIn post, I have this picture of me like dancing at a Christmas party wearing like a Christmas sweater. And I'm like just kind of like dancing and, like that's the video. I don't have a straight faced, headshot, professional headshot, because that's not me. Like, I don't want to do that. I've never done a professional headshot before. Even at work, it's funny because I used that same headshot on Teams. And my internal thing when I worked at GE Aerospace, big, giant corporation. And I had people that I'd never met before on random meetings being like, Jeremy, I didn't know, that's such a fun, you look so fun, like that kind of stuff. And I'm like, yeah, why do we have to be so serious?
Right.
Like why does everybody have to have the same stupid headshot? I use that on Slack channel on my office and Teams, and when we'd have meetings, that little headshot would show up if my camera was off. And I have had so many people tell me like, oh, I didn't know we could do like fun headshots. I was like, why would you assume you couldn't? And I don't know. I just used that. I don't know. But it got people to open up. And especially for meetings where they're very tense, I felt like that, bringing it back around, that sort of like engaged, quote unquote, fun persona in a way, helped make those hard conversations easier a lot of times. It helped build relationships with those people. They wanted to have one-on-ones with me because those one-on-ones weren't boring and miserable. They were somewhat fun. We laughed and we joked around and stuff. So tying it all back to like work, I think like for me, that's kind of like my personal brand. I don't know. That
I
was a
love that.
long-winded answer.
No,
But
there's so many great things in what you just said, and one of the main ones of the intention for you to be your authentic self gives space for other humans to be their authentic selves,
yes, exactly.
especially
Yeah.
in places where sometimes it's like, the stuffiness of
Yeah,
in certain
absolutely.
environments. So that's beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. I didn't even really think about that too until the first time I heard that. And I heard it more than, it wasn't a lot, like maybe 3 or 4 times over the like 8 years I worked at a place like G. But, it was just always like shocking to me that like people felt they couldn't do that. Like why do you think this place is so serious? Just because we're making like jet engines doesn't mean we can't enjoy ourselves and have fun. You know what I mean? So it was just kind of like interesting, and I think you're absolutely right. Like that gave them the permission to then do it, and then hopefully that like changes the culture too of the team. Probably not at a corporate level, but at least at like a local team, sort of immediate team perspective, where we're all kind of like being ourselves and having fun in meetings, which I think ultimately makes you more productive and more
Totally does.
effective.
Yeah.
Right. So going back to that like goal, that's the ultimate goal there. It's not just to have fun and just like crack jokes at work. That makes it enjoyable, but at the same time, it does ultimately, I think, make a more high performing team when people enjoy working with their colleagues.
Absolutely. Yeah, people like it's like a little sciencey, but you have alpha and beta waves in your brain, and when you're having fun, even though it's something serious,
Mm-hmm.
I think you can accomplish the goal and even in a better
Mm.
way. But when people are more relaxed, they're able to be themselves. The critical thinking aspect is so much better than when it's like fight or flight. This has to be perfect. This is super serious. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
you're changing the world, even if not on a grander scale, just by bringing that energy into the rooms.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, thinking about this like from a science perspective is really fascinating. And I don't think I ever actually thought about this would be like a whole nother episode on its own. Like how do you make a high performing team? But that idea though, like we're in software, we generally have really complex problems to solve. And there are new and novel and creative ways to solve the problem. And there are, generic, the straightforward ways to solve the problem. And I think when you're under pressure, you tend to think less outside the box. You tend to think less creatively. You're under pressure, like you said. You got to meet those deadlines, like you mentioned. And so you're less likely to experiment. You're less likely to test new ideas because you're scared to fail. If you fail, you're going to get in trouble. And I think, all that, we're going far off beyond
Beyond UX.
The brand. Yeah, there you go. That's it. We talk about everything here. But we're going off past personal brand, but I think that's a fascinating. I'm going to have a conversation with somebody about that, by the way. That's a really fascinating topic. It could be another
Totally
episode. Have you
is.
back on.
Yeah. In intensive care, some of our trainings was like, people are literally dying and you have seconds. And so you're trained as, like I did rapid response team, which like you have a team of people. How you're trained is actually to walk into the room that you're bored, right? Because when you walk into the room, you're like, oh my God, like we need to get this, that. Everyone starts
Right.
freaking out. But when you and the physician or whoever the leader is, you're walking in and it's calm. Sometimes even during intubations or like when we're, doing CPR, sometimes we'll like talk about like, what are you having for lunch? And that type of scenario outperforms like the
Imagine.
frantic and the scattered and just, the anxiety-ridden leaders. So yeah, that's an interesting conversation for sure.
I love that. Yeah, and I'm thinking about this too. I never really thought about this, but there's such a connection between mind and body,
Hmm.
right? And if you think you're going to die, I imagine that I'm sure you could put some kind of percentage in there, but I imagine that would greatly impact the likelihood of you actually surviving versus if the nurse comes in and you think you're going to survive and they pretend like you're going to survive. And even if they're like, there's no chance this person's going to survive, they're acting as if there is a huge possibility. I imagine you're more willing to fight. You're more willing to get through it. And, I've never been in that situation before, luckily, but I imagine that plays a lot into it. But I don't know. That's super
Absolutely.
fascinating. I love that. But I think you could apply the same concepts to meetings at work
Hmm.
where very tense meeting, someone's mad about a deadline, someone's mad you didn't include a feature, or someone's pissed off that something was wrong or broken or bugs or sales dropped or whatever it is. I think you could apply that same kind of thing in a meeting, and I actually want to explore that. That's really interesting. All right. Side note: everyone listening, expect an episode to come out about that sometime in the future because I'm fascinated about that. All right. So Anais, last question. I'm curious. Thinking about personal brand, everybody listening out there, we've talked a lot at a very high level. I'm curious, are there any specific kind of tactical things that someone could do today to start thinking about their personal brand and ultimately end up being more effective in their career? What are some tactical things, tips, advice that you could give some folks out there listening?
Yeah, that's a great question. Some of the folks that I mentor, one of the number one things is not a company that you want to work at, not a specific goal, but what is the legacy that you hope to leave behind when your career is over? And it doesn't actually have to be like, oh, I want to make this cool product, but rather, how many lives do you want to touch? What problems in the world do you hope, to either fix or, leave a mark on? Or if it's just as simple as when I was at work, like you, Jeremy, I produced a fun environment that, had an effect on the overall product. Having that like legacy that's more value based versus product based, and then reverse engineer and see like what are the opportunities that I can take that match this value based legacy that I want to leave. What are the posts that I want to share that match, my end goal? And then some other tactical things of I think my LinkedIn has, it's a really bright pink background. I'm a neutrals girl, but I like do that on purpose. So how can you bring positive attention? So, on LinkedIn, I have that bright pink background. So whenever I leave a comment or a post, your
Yeah, it's
eye
smart.
is directly going to, my picture because it's really bright and a little
Yeah,
obnoxious, but it produced the results. That, being positive, leaving positive comments, those are just some LinkedIn tips. Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, it's really great. I'm so glad you mentioned the first part, right? Before you do anything, figure out why you're doing it. And then that will, in theory, lead to the other stuff. Like a couple of things, like you mentioned, positivity. I try very hard to not complain about things online. And what's funny is like my whole family, my wife even, like it's funny, I started this podcast, or not this podcast, my first podcast. My wife got me a podcast. I'd never even considered a podcast like years ago. And my wife got me a podcast kit. That was like a book about podcasting, a microphone, headphones. And the thing that she said was, "You like to complain. Maybe you could start a podcast." And I was like, "I like to complain." Is it that like that was my brand? Like everybody knew, like I complain about stuff. I'd just be like, "Oh, this stupid thing," or "Oh my God, it's so hot today," or "Oh, this damn bird shit in my car again." Like that complaining about stuff, right? And I used to use Twitter and Facebook back in the day. I've since like deleted my accounts, but I would just bitch about stuff like, "Oh, this stupid thing. I had this really," and if you went and looked at the feed, it was just like complain, 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 complain. So when I got on LinkedIn and started posting again, I was like, I am not going to complain. I am not going to call people out unless they really need to be called out, like for egregious things, like racism or misogyny or something. But I'm not going to just like call people out for doing their job wrong or having an idea that I don't agree with necessarily or things like that. I'll talk about it, but like, in a positive way. I'm not going to like try to make people feel bad because I would have done that 5-10 years ago. So that's, to me, is part of my personal brand too. And I think that, trying to be positive, some would say it's maybe like I'm chickening out. I'm not calling people out when they should be called out. But at the same time, I'm like, what am I going to do? Like, it's not going to change their mind. If they have this idea, me calling them out on social media is not going to change their mind. There's no outcome there's no beneficial outcome there other than me looking like an asshole. Exactly. Yeah. So anyway, that's something I try to cultivate, is to try to be positive, trying to complain about stuff. I feel like I still have a lot of stuff to complain about. Maybe I need like a burner account that's like anonymous so I can just go and complain about the algorithm or not getting enough likes or whatever, and stuff like that. But anyway, I love that. I love that you call that out. First, have a goal before you go and start any of this stuff. And I think it's interesting because I asked for like tactical advice. But I kind of set you up to like almost not have an answer, because it really depends. Like what you're trying to do influences what you do. So I think the best advice you could give anybody is, like you said, think about it first and have a goal and an outcome, and everything else in theory should flow. It should follow. So anyway, I really love that. All right, so Anais, so we've had you for a little while now. We've got some questions that I like to ask all my guests to help our listeners get to know our guests a little bit better. But before we do that, any closing advice, tips, or anything that we didn't get a chance to talk about with regards to personal brand that you wanna call out before we get in those questions?
Yeah, I think somewhere along this discussion, you mentioned authenticity. I think that's important to bring as well, right? Curating, but also being yourself. What you said about like the interview process as well. People are so scared to be themselves because they want the job, right? But it's like, if someone doesn't hire you for being yourself or the professional version of yourself, why would you want to work for that company in the first place, right? Like you said, you're trying to crack a joke and have a better time during the interview and it just feels very cold. That might be an indicator of how like every day is at that job, or even worse, because people usually bring a better version of themselves to the interview. And so to listen to that advice deeply, because when you're where you belong, you perform better.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. All right. That is awesome advice. I love it. You ready to get in some of these questions?
Yeah, let's go.
All right. Awesome. I've got 5 simple questions that I like to ask all my guests for our listeners to help. Jeez, I can't talk. I got 5. I can't talk today. I got 5 questions for all of our guests to answer so that our listeners can get to know our guests a little bit better. First up, what is your favorite non-design
book? I love The Great Gatsby, or 1984.
1984?
Yeah.
Very different books.
Yeah.
Very different books. What is it about those 2 books that call to you? Because they are very...
Absolutely. Like, I love The Great Gatsby because in that book, he has like, the green light, which is supposed to symbolize like the dream that you have.
Oh,
But
right,
once
yeah.
you get it, sometimes you're just disillusioned, like by how happy something could make you. And I hold on to that dearly because while you're getting to wherever you want to go, you should enjoy where you are and never think that a certain thing can make you happy. You can be happy right here in the moment. Most folks get disillusioned. They're like, oh, if I just get that promotion or that dream job at that dream company, and then they get there and they're like, this didn't really feel the way I thought it would feel. So yeah. And then
Yeah.
1984, because I'm from Ukraine and, my country like went through communism, and just reading that and being aware of like, wow, like our devices sometimes, like, are they helpful or are they like controlling us in a way? Um,
Yeah.
gosh, that it could be like a whole separate discussion on that.
Oh my
But
God. Yeah, I'm sure we could. Yeah, that's fascinating too, because I feel like 1984 applies so much to 2024, unfortunately. And obviously the stuff going on in Ukraine now with Russia and everything else, and authoritarian countries, and Donald Trump potentially, I don't know what your politics are, but Donald Trump potentially getting reelected, which is just 100% like that's what he wants. He wants to be Big Brother.
yes,
As
okay.
much as he claims personal liberties and freedoms and the GOP and all that bullshit, going down a rabbit hole there. But it's frightening how important that book and the message is even still today.
Yeah,
So that's a great book. I
absolutely.
love that book. Fascinating book. If you haven't read 1984 in high school, go back and reread it. Or if you did read it in high school, go back and reread it today, because
So
it'll blow your mind how beneficial that the message is still today. All right, what is your favorite non-design podcast?
non-design podcast. I love listening to the Skinny Confidential. I think they have just broad range of discussions, but they they ask their guests about stuff of like, how were you like in childhood? So they have all these like famous people, but they really get into the psychology of the person, because I think sometimes success is so unrelatable, but if you get into the deeper psychology, you're able to see that a lot of successful individuals are broken, and I think we can all relate with someone else's brokenness and see
Interesting.
like, oh, like if they've overcome this thing and they're like, they're here, they're at the top, then I can do the same. And so it's really inspiring. I love that podcast.
Wow, I love that. I love you mentioned that, because I just last night we watched Bratz, which I don't know if you've seen that documentary. It's about the Brat Pack from the 80s, like Andrew McCarthy and Molly Ringwald and Emilio Estevez and that whole crew. And it was talking about how the epitome of like Hollywood success in the 80s. They were all like that, especially when that article came out. And it's interesting, maybe that article was the reason for it, but that impacted them so much, and they were like still thinking about that article 40 years later and how it impacted their career in a negative way, and they just have all this like emotional baggage from that. But you would never really think about that from the outside. You're just like, oh, they have a bunch of money, I know they're successful and everybody knows them and blah blah blah. Still like 40 years later or 30 years later, I don't know how long it's been, at 40 years, that's crazy. It's still kind of like it carries with them. And that's like you said, like these successful people a lot of times are actually broken, and you never realize it, because you just see this, you see the brand that they put out there for everyone to see. They don't talk about the broken. Anyway, fascinating. I love how we just brought that back to personal brand. All right, what is your favorite meal? I imagine you've got an interesting palate, having parents from Ukraine and I think Egypt is what you said, right?
Oh, yeah.
That's got to be like growing up eating some really interesting food, and then I imagine you still travel back. I don't know if you still travel back and forth. Favorite meal?
I love, I think a realistic meal is like my cup of coffee with just like a ton of milk and sugar. Um,
I love that. That's a meal. That counts. I'll allow it.
but like a favorite meal, we have these like raviolis that have like potato and caramelized onion, and then you just like pour a ton of butter on it. God, it's so good.
Is this a Ukrainian dish?
Yes, yeah.
What is it called? What is the name?
They're blini z kartoshkai, which is like, yeah, basically like raviolis with potatoes in there.
Wow. Okay. Is that kind of like a pierogi? Is that similar
Kind
to
of
like
thing.
a Polish pierogi or a Russian pierogi?
Yep, literally same thing.
That's
Yeah,
It's the same thing.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Oh man, I got to go to Warsaw for 2 weeks, and we stopped at like a bunch of the little. They have these little. How they call them, milk bars maybe, like Soviet era milk bars, but it's like
Sure.
home cooked meals. It's like your grandma cooked these meals and pierogies and all the like borscht and all this stuff. Whew, God, the food was so good over there. Anyway,
So good. I
I
love
never had a chance to go to Ukraine, but I would love to go at some point. But I imagine the food's really good. They actually just opened up a Ukrainian restaurant in Cincinnati, where I live.
where you must
And
go.
I haven't been able to go yet. I got to find a babysitter, but that's my goal, is to go to that place. It's really good. She actually, I think her parents were like Russian and Ukrainian, and they moved here when she was a kid, or maybe she was born here, but her parents were there. Anyway, she learned all these recipes from her grandparents and stuff, and so she used all that stuff. She actually has a place called the Vodka Bar, which is like a lot of Eastern European, Russian, Ukrainian and stuff meals and stuff. So anyway,
Lovely.
I love that stuff. All right, what is your favorite vacation spot?
Anywhere that's warm. I
Not
will
Minnesota.
say like I mean I live in Minnesota, so it's just like it's winter almost 9 months out of the year. But I love South Carolina. Like when we came to the United States, we thought we were gonna like, see cowboys, people wearing turquoise and like southern accents. That's super exotic to us. But in Minnesota, there's none of that. And so like I love the South. I remember just going back this last winter to South Carolina and I saw Southern Belle and it was like, this is amazing. And just the vegetation is so beautiful. But yeah, anywhere where there's a beach, anywhere it's like sunny and 70, that's the perfect vacation spot.
I love it. I've got to go to Folly Beach in South Carolina once, and it was really pretty. I'm originally from New Orleans, so we would go to Florida, the Panhandle, like Destin, Rosemary Beach, like 30A area, Fort Walton area. Like we would always go to different places depending on where we could find the cheapest hotel room. But that's something like now that I live in Cincinnati, it's like 15 hours away. So we just recently discovered the beaches in Michigan, which are beautiful. And if you've never had a chance to go to like South Haven or Saugatuck or anywhere on the like western coast of Michigan, some of those places are beautiful, and it's not as far. I guess from Minnesota you might fly anyway, regardless. So I don't know if it matters, but I don't know what part of Minnesota do you live in? St. Paul or
Minneapolis, yeah.
Minneapolis. Okay, I don't know my geography. I don't know where that is in Minnesota, but I don't know how close you are to Michigan. But I imagine that'd be a decent drive for you. But anyway, if you ever check out like the western side of Michigan, it's like really cool beaches, and you don't have to go all the way across the country to South Carolina. It's not the same though. I mean, it's not exactly the same, but it is similar. It's got like coastal vibes, if that's what you're looking for in South Carolina. It's got like really coastal vibes. You might dig it. I don't know. Something to
I
think
know,
about.
I always think it's crazy that you can get like this incredible like beach from a lake.
Yeah, but it's so big. Like it's got waves, like sand, and it's like natural. It's not like pumped in or anything. But what's funny is they have these T-shirts and like stickers and stuff that you can get, and it's like, all the fun, none of the sharks. Or like all the fun, no salt, no sharks, it's like salt-free, shark-free.
No graders.
Yeah, it's so funny. But the water is like, I mean, it's pretty, but it's funny because like you think about like similar to Michigan or similar to Minnesota, you can go to Michigan for like 2 months, 3 months out of the year and it's like frozen the rest of the time. So it's like this beautiful, like kind of coastal place, but you can only go in like the summer. Otherwise, like I think it even, the last time we were there, someone was telling me it like snowed in like the beginning of spring or something like that. Or it
Yeah,
was
like
like still
May.
freezing and yeah.
Sometimes it snows
So,
in May. It's
oh
so
my God.
sad.
Yeah. Anyway, that doesn't happen in Florida, but you get a lot more beach time in Florida. All right. What is your favorite design tool that is not Figma?
Pen and piece of paper. Yeah.
Piece of paper. I love when people answer that. A lot of people have actually said that, and that's my favorite answer for anyone listening. Future reference, you're listening, you come on the show, you get bonus points from me. What do you like to do? Pen and paper. You like to sketch? You like to doodle? What do you like to do? Like just draw stuff out real quick, or you got a favorite thing you do with the pen?
Yeah. I think it's just such a fast way to like get whatever you're thinking out there. And then into Figma for like a higher fidelity, just so you remember like how things are going, flowing, whatever.
Yeah, right on. All right, follow-up question. Dot graph or blank white paper? You got a preference?
And I love a good dot graph. Love a good dot graph.
Oh, I'm
'Cause
like,
it's like
I get
it
all these
brings
little like, oh, sorry, go ahead.
it brings a little like structure to the chaos, right?
Yeah, because I can't draw a square.
No.
But with dot graph, like I got all these little field notebooks with the dot graph papers. Like I don't know, I love it because yeah, it helps me keep my lines straight when I'm even just a list because I'm like constantly just like my handwriting is awful, so it helps me. I almost knocked it over. Anyway, it helps me out a lot. I love the dot graphs. All right, cool, Ani. So this has been a lot of fun. That's all the questions I got for you. Before we get out of here, why don't you tell everybody where they can find you? Give yourself a little plug.
Yeah, this has been fun. Thank you so much.
Yeah,
You
of
can
course.
find me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty responsive through there. And yeah, just start a conversation, hit me up in the messages, and I'm excited.
Right. Yeah, and we'll include links and all that stuff in the show notes. Anais is spelled Anais, but what do you call that letter with the I with the two dots? Is there a word for
Umlaut.
that? Umlaut. Yeah, so the umlaut, but I think you can also type in a regular I in LinkedIn. You can find her, and we'll link to your LinkedIn in the show notes. And so if anyone wants to find you, you can do that there, or Google or search Anais Wittrock-Roske, Roske. Cool. All right, Anais. So this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for coming on. I think we learned a lot. I definitely learned a lot. I thought about some stuff I hadn't actually considered before, and that was fantastic. So thank you for coming on.
Jamie, thank you so much for having me. This is fun.